Hi, I'm Cody with Ajax Motorsports, and today I'm going to show you how to clean and grease your linkages on your dirt bike. It's winter time, so now is a good time as any to go ahead and take that apart while you got some downtime and it's cold outside. So we're going to start by removing the linkage. Some of the things that you'll need to remove may vary depending on what bike that you have. However, on this KTM, the only thing that you really need to worry about is your brake pedal. So we're just going to go ahead and remove that, get that out of the way for us. When removing some of these bolts, it might be helpful to pick up the rear wheel a little bit, take some of the tension off. If you're having a hard time getting them out, it may be helpful to use a hammer to tap it out. I'm using a dead blow hammer. What you want to be careful with is that you don't mess up the head of it and that you don't mess up the threads. So just kind of be careful with that. Now that we have our linkage parts separated from the motorcycle, we're going to go ahead and use some spray solvent, a toothbrush, and some rags just to get the outsides cleaned up before we dig into the inside. When you're using spray chemicals like this, I definitely would recommend using some safety glasses. Just, you never know where it's going to go. You really need to be more careful whenever you're power washing the linkages on your bike. A lot of people will just spray there, get it all cleaned up good, and what they're actually doing is forcing water into the bearings and also forcing out the grease that's there protecting them. So that causes premature wear on your linkage parts. And go ahead and clean up your bolts while you're in here and inspect them for unusual wear. If they're wearing through too bad, you might consider replacing them. But if you stay on top of this task, you won't have to worry about that too much. All right, so our next step here is to take these little covers off. You want to just use a small flathead screwdriver, pop those out. You don't have to be real aggressive with it. I like to do just one at a time, work my way around. Another little tip here is on the inside of these guys right here, so you have your inner race, your bearings, and then your outer race. So a little tip here is to not completely remove your inner race if they're uncaged bearings. If they're caged bearings, you don't really have to worry about losing bearings. However, in this one, if you took it completely out, you get a little aggressive there, you could risk losing one of these rollers or needles. So a little tip here, just kind of leave that partially in there and clean it about halfway and then flip it over and do the other side. So we're just going to liberally spray that out and work it around in there. Brush that out. We're just trying to get all that gunk out of there, flush it out. If you do decide to remove the inner race and you start losing bearings, as I did, don't panic, it's not that big a deal as long as you haven't lost them. If you have lost them, good luck. And you're gonna have a hard time getting them back in, so what you're gonna do is make sure you dry the surface off a little bit and just put a little bit of grease inside of there. Helps them kind of stick in there, makes them all happy while you're waiting on them to go all in. If you're looking in here and you're seeing that they are rusted and pitted, that's a good indicator that it might be time to retire these and throw some new ones in. All right, now that everything's clean and dry inside of there, we're going to go ahead and start using our grease and packing that back in there as well. I like to use this Silklean grease. I like it mostly because the packaging, the inside of this has this inner little ring that actually keeps you from having to dig inside of one of those long tubes and get grease out of there. So I'm a big fan. I like that a lot. Like I said, try to keep that inner race in there as much as you can and keep this from falling out. So you're just going to work the grease into there until you get it all the way through there, and you can ensure that it's properly greased. And I'm going to flip it over, kind of work grease between both sides and get a good even coating all the way to the bottom of the rollers. Once we have that all greased up, we're just going to reinstall our little covers here. And you don't nearly need to pack grease into here. The grease that's overflowing from in here is good enough. But you do want to make sure that you have just a little bit in here just so the bolt doesn't stick. Other than that, you're just going to do this all the way around. Typically, I'll have to look at a picture of the motorcycle to see how the linkage goes before I start back in on it, because I never can remember. But in this case, I'll start with this dog bone. Put some grease on the bolt itself. This guy comes in from the other side. You really want to pay attention to where these flat spots are located and positioned when you reinstall, because if they are not seated against what's supposed to hold them, you can mess up the head of this and you're ultimately not going to get it to lock down the way it's supposed to. And I'm going to start these back on. However, I'm not going to torque them down just yet. Get everything assembled, then I'll make sure I have the proper torque specs and then torque it all down. Again, when you're tightening these down, you want to make sure that flat spot is positioned in the right place. You'll definitely know it's wrong when your bolt doesn't seem long enough. I always want to stress how important it is that we keep proper specs on all of our nuts and bolts here, especially when it comes to these linkages. We don't want to over tighten them or under tighten them. They can be both disastrous. So consult the owner's manual and we're going to go ahead and torque those down. Lastly, I'll be reinstalling the brake lever, and I'm actually going to do a little quick tip here. This brake spring has a bad habit of falling off, and that has to do with the bottom of this is actually pointed kind of right at your boot. So one of my techs recommended, and it's a good idea, if we just flip this spring around, you're less likely to drag your boot on the edge of this guy right here and pop your spring off. It doesn't take very long, it doesn't take a whole lot of skill, but it's one of those things that can cost you a lot of money and time and headache in the long run, especially if those things get seized up in there. So make this part of your regular, especially if it's after a muddy race or if you decide to over clean your swing arm. Definitely keep that in mind. Thank you for watching this tech tip. We'll see you soon.